The first time I noticed the calls was on a Tuesday in early October, the kind of night when the wind scratches at the windows like it wants to be let in. I was half asleep, tangled in the sheets, when Ethan's phone lit up on the nightstand. He reached for it instantly, the way people do when they're expecting something they don't want anyone else to see. He swung his legs out of bed, whispered "work," and disappeared downstairs. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the low murmur of his voice through the floorboards. It wasn't the first time, but it was the first time I admitted to myself that I was keeping count. Hey friends, welcome back to GraceTime with Auntie. I'm so happy to see you here. Tell me, which country are you watching from today? Grab your coffee, sit back, and let's dive into today's amazing story together. By the third week, the pattern was carved in stone. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, somewhere between 12:47 a.m. and 1:20 a.m., the phone would buzz, Ethan would answer, and within 10 minutes, the front door would click shut behind him. He always came back before dawn, sliding into bed with cold hands and the faint smell of night air and gasoline. When I asked where he'd been, he gave me the same soft smile and said, "Couldn't sleep. Went for a drive." I nodded like a good wife, like a woman who still believed in the vows we'd taken 12 years earlier, but inside something was curdling. We had been happy once. Everyone said so. Ethan and Claire Harper, the golden couple who survived the worst thing that can happen to two people and somehow stayed standing. Our son, Noah, disappeared on his 8th birthday, taken from the county fair, while Ethan turned his back for 30 seconds to buy kettle corn. 30 seconds. The police searched for 18 months. The news cycle chewed us up and spat us out. Eventually the posters yellowed, the tip lines went quiet, and the world moved on. Ethan and I never did. We just learned to live around the hole, but holes have edges, and lately I'd started feeling something sharp along those edges, something that looked a lot like suspicion. Ethan had always been the strong one, the one who held me when I woke up screaming Noah's name. Now he was the one slipping out of our bed in the dark, lying with the ease of a man who'd practiced. I told myself it was another woman. It was the only explanation that made sense. Grief breaks marriages in slow motion, and maybe ours had finally cracked wide open. The thought should have devastated me. Instead, it felt almost clean, like a wound you could finally see and bandage. I started paying attention the way only a desperate woman can. I checked his phone when he showered, passcode still Noah's birthday, 08-18, but there were no late-night texts, no hearts, no lipstick emojis, just a single outgoing call every time to a number with no contact name, always at the same minute. I wrote it down on the back of a grocery receipt and told myself I wouldn't use it. 3 nights later, I dialed it from the landline while Ethan slept. It rang 4 times and went to a generic voicemail. A man's voice, low and distorted by bad connection or deliberate effect, said only, "Leave coordinates if you're sure." Then nothing. I hung up shaking. The following Monday, I pretended to take 2 sleeping pills and turned away from him in bed. I listened to the familiar ritual. Phone buzz, whispered conversation, the creak of the 3rd stair he always missed, the soft snick of the front door. This time I was already dressed under the covers. I gave him a 5-minute head start, pulled on my boots, and followed. Our house sits on the edge of Willow Creek, a small town that forgets its own name after dark. The streets were empty, the streetlights flickering like they were on their last breath. Ethan's truck turned left onto County 14, the old logging road that no one uses anymore except teenagers looking for privacy. I kept my headlights off and followed at a crawl, heart hammering so hard I could taste metal. 10 miles out, the pavement gave way to gravel. Another 3 miles, and the trees pressed in close, black and wet from earlier rain. He stopped at the gate of the abandoned Calder farm. Everyone in town knew the place. The Calder family had lost everything in the recession, walked away from 300 acres and a rotting Victorian house with the furniture still inside. Teenagers said it was haunted. Kids dared each other to spend the night. Ethan had never once mentioned it, not in all the years we'd lived 10 minutes away. He killed his lights, got out, and walked through the rusted gate on foot. I parked 100 yards back, grabbed the flashlight I'd started keeping in the glove box, and followed. The air smelled of pine and wet earth. My shoes sank into the mud with every step. I could see his silhouette moving up the long driveway toward the house, but he didn't go to the house. He veered left, toward the old equipment barn that leaned like it was trying to lie down and die. I circled wide, staying in the tree line. When I was close enough, I saw light leaking from a crack in the barn siding, thin and yellow, the color of old teeth. Voices drifted out, too low to make out words, but unmistakably, 2 people talking. One of them was Ethan. The other was younger, higher, but definitely male. My stomach flipped. I crept closer until I could press my eye to the gap between 2 warped boards. Inside, a single hanging bulb swayed over a card table. Ethan stood with his back to me, shoulders hunched the way they used to hunch when he carried Noah on his hips. Across from him sat a boy, maybe 16, thin and sharp-shouldered, wearing a black hoodie pulled up so far I couldn't see his face. Between them on the table lay a map, a burner phone, and what looked like a stack of cash. Ethan reached out and touched the boy's arm, gentle, the way he used to touch Noah when he was scared of thunderstorms. The boy flinched, but didn't pull away. I must have made a sound, because both of them froze. Ethan spun around, eyes scanning the darkness. I dropped to the ground, heart exploding in my chest, mud soaking. Through my jeans. I counted to 100, then 200. When I dared look again, the light was off and the barn was empty. I waited another 20 minutes, shivering, before I ran back to my car and drove home with the heater on full blast and tears freezing on my cheeks. Ethan was already in bed when I slipped inside, breathing slow and even like a man who had never left. I stood in the doorway watching him and felt the world tilt under my feet. That boy in the barn, his shoulders, the way he held his head slightly to the left when he listened. It was familiar in a way that made my bones ache. But Noah would be 16 now, and Noah was dead. We'd buried an empty casket because there had been no body. Everyone knew that. I knew that. I didn't sleep again that night. At 6:03 a.m., Ethan kissed my forehead, told me he loved me, and left for work. The moment his car pulled away, I was on the computer searching the Calder farm, the county records, anything that might tell me why my husband was meeting a teenage boy in a falling-down barn at 2 a.m. I found nothing except a string of unpaid taxes and a foreclosure notice from 8 years ago. 8 years, right after Noah vanished. I called in sick to the library where I'd worked for the last decade and drove back to the farm in daylight. The place looked even worse without the kindness of darkness. Roof sagging, windows blind with plywood, weeds growing through the cracks in the porch. I walked straight to the barn. The door hung open on one hinge. Inside, the card table was still there, but the map and money were gone. Only a single Polaroid remained, tucked under a coffee mug like someone wanted me to find it. I picked it up with shaking fingers. It showed a little boy with Ethan's dark hair and my gray eyes standing in front of a Christmas tree. He was wearing the exact same dinosaur pajamas Noah had worn the last morning we saw him alive. On the white border, someone had written in black Sharpie, "He's safer if you stay away." I sat down hard on the dirty floor and cried until there was nothing left but dry sobs and the taste of rust in my mouth. Because the boy in that photograph wasn't just similar to Noah. He was Noah. Older, thinner, eyes older than any 16-year-old's should be, but Noah. My son was alive. My husband had known for God knows how long, and he was keeping him hidden from me. I drove home in a trance, the Polaroid burning a hole in my pocket. Every mile felt like betrayal. Ethan had looked me in the eye for years, held me while I fell apart on the anniversary of Noah's disappearance, and all that time our son was 20 minutes away, eating cold beans out of a can in a rotting barn. I pulled over twice to throw up on the side of the road. When I walked into the kitchen, Ethan was already home early, standing at the sink with a cup of coffee gone cold in his hand. He turned when he heard me, and the look on his face told me everything I needed to know. He'd been waiting. "Claire," he said, voice cracking on the second syllable. I pulled the photograph from my pocket and set it on the table between us like a loaded gun. He stared at it for a long time, then closed his eyes. "How long?" I asked. My voice sounded like someone else's, flat and ancient. He opened his mouth, closed it again. 8 years, he whispered finally. Almost 9. The room spun. I gripped the back of a chair to stay upright. "You let me bury him. There was no body," he said, as if that made it better. "You needed closure. I thought—" "You thought?" I laughed, a horrible sound. "You thought you'd decide for both of us that our son was better off dead to me?" He moved toward me, and I backed away so fast I hit the wall. "Don't touch me. Start talking, Ethan. All of it. Now!" He sank into a chair like his legs had given out. The story came in pieces, halting and ugly, the way truth always does when it's been buried too long. 3 weeks after Noah disappeared, Ethan had been driving these back roads at night, the way he'd done every night since, half hoping to find a body, half hoping never to find anything at all. He'd pulled onto the Calder property on a hunch, some instinct he couldn't name. The barn door had been ajar. Inside he found Noah, 8 years old and terrified, wrists rubbed raw from zip ties, gagged with one of his own socks. A man Ethan had never seen before lay dead on the floor, skull caved in by what looked like a tire iron still clutched in Noah's shaking hands. Noah had managed to work one hand free while the man slept off a bottle of cheap whiskey. He'd hit him until he stopped moving. Then he'd sat in the dark, waiting for someone to come, too afraid to leave the only place he knew his parents might look. Ethan had carried him out to the truck, wrapped in a horse blanket that smelled of mold and old blood. He'd driven straight to the hospital, but halfway. There, Noah started screaming that they'd kill him, that the man had friends who'd come back for him, that they knew where we lived. Ethan, panicked and half mad himself, had turned the truck around. He'd brought Noah here instead, to the empty Calder house, and he'd kept him. I listened with my arms wrapped around myself to keep from flying apart. Every word was a blade. "You hid our son," I said when he finished. "You hid him from the police, from me, from the world. You let people think a predator still had him. You let me think he was dead." "I was trying to protect him," Ethan said. Tears ran down his face, but I felt nothing looking at them. "The man who took him, Claire, he wasn't working alone. There were others. They left messages on the burner phone for months, photographs of our house, of you at the grocery store. They said if Noah ever surfaced, they'd finish what they started. I couldn't risk it. So you kept him in a barn like an animal?" "It was temporary. At first. Then weeks became months. He didn't want to leave. He was different after. Nightmares. He'd scream if a car backfired. I homeschooled him with library books. I brought food, clothes, everything he needed. I was going to figure out a permanent solution, I swear. 9 years, Ethan. 9 years, and you never once thought I deserved to know my child was alive?" He had no answer for that. There was no answer. I left him sitting at the kitchen table and went upstairs. I packed one bag, just enough for a few days. When I came down, he was still in the same spot, staring at nothing. "I'm going to him," I said. "And you're going to stay the hell away until I decide what happens next." He started to stand. "Claire, it's not safe." "Safe?" I spat the word at him. "You lost the right to use that word the day you decided you were God." I took his truck keys from the hook by the door. He didn't stop me. The drive to the Calder farm took forever, and no time at all. Dusk bled across the sky, purple and bruised. I parked in the same spot I'd used the night before and walked up the driveway with the flashlight off, letting my eyes adjust. The barn door stood open. Inside, the single bulb was on again, swaying gently. Noah sat at the card table with his back to me, hood up, shoulders hunched over something I couldn't see. I stopped in the doorway, afraid to breathe. "Noah?" My voice cracked like thin ice. He went very still. Slowly he turned the chair around. The face that looked back at me was older, sharper, cheekbones cutting shadows under skin too pale for a boy who should have spent years in sunlight. But it was him, the same storm cloud eyes, the same small scar on his chin from when he fell off the monkey bars at 6. My knees buckled. "Mom?" he whispered, and the sound of that word in his deeper, broken voice undid me completely. I crossed the room in 3 steps and pulled him into my arms. He was taller than me now, all long bones and trembling muscle, but he folded into me the way he used to when he was small and the world was too big. We sank to the floor together and held on until there was no space left between grief and joy, until I wasn't sure whose tears were whose. Eventually, he pulled back, wiping his face on his sleeve. "Dad said you couldn't know, that it would put you in danger." "Your dad was wrong," I said fiercely. "He was wrong about everything." Noah looked toward the door like he expected Ethan to appear and drag him away again. "There are still people looking for me," he said quietly. "They check sometimes. Dad taught me how to hide if a car comes down the road, how to use the root cellar, how to—" His voice caught. "How to finish it if they ever get inside." I felt something inside me fracture permanently. "That part's over," I told him. "You're coming home." His eyes filled again. "I don't know how to be normal anymore. I haven't been to school since 3rd grade. I've never had a friend my age. I get panic attacks in grocery stores. Sometimes I can't even go in the house because the rooms feel too small." "We'll figure it out," I said. "Together, like we should have from the beginning." He nodded, uncertain. But when I stood and held out my hand, he took it. His fingers were cold and calloused, a stranger's and my baby's all at once. We walked out of the barn, into the night. The sky was clear, stars flung across it like someone had thrown handfuls of broken glass. I helped him into the passenger seat of Ethan's truck. He kept his hood up and his hands clenched in his lap the whole drive home, flinching every time headlights appeared behind us. When we pulled into our driveway, he stared at the house like he'd never seen it before. "It looks smaller," he said. "Everything does when you've been gone long enough." I led him inside. He stopped in the foyer, breathing fast, eyes darting to corners the way cornered things do. I took him upstairs to his old room. We'd left it exactly as it was the day he vanished. Dinosaur comforter, glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, Lego sets half built on the floor. He stood in the doorway for a long time, then walked in and touched the edge of the bed like he was checking it was real. "I used to dream about this place," he said, "but the dreams always turned bad." "Not anymore," I told him. I meant it with every cell in my body. He slept in his old bed that night, fully clothed, door locked from the inside. I sat on the floor outside his room until dawn, listening to him breathe through the wood. Ethan came home the next afternoon. I heard his key in the lock and met him in the hallway with a kitchen knife in my hand. He took one look at my face and raised both palms. "I'm not here to fight," he said. "I just want to see him." "He's upstairs sleeping," I said, "and you'll see him when he's ready, not before." Ethan nodded like that was fair. He looked 10 years older than he had yesterday, eyes red-rimmed, stubble going gray. "There are things you need to know, Claire, about why I did it, about who those people were." I wanted to tell him I didn't care, that nothing he said could justify 9 lost years, but Noah's voice drifted down the stairs, small and uncertain. "Dad?" Ethan's face crumpled. He took the stairs 2 at a time. I followed more slowly, knife still in my hand, though I no longer knew who I meant to use it on. Noah stood in the doorway of his room, barefoot, hair sticking up in every direction. When Ethan reached him, he didn't hug him right away. He just looked, drinking in the sight like a man dying of thirst. Then Noah stepped forward and let Ethan wrap him up. They held each other so tightly, I heard one of them, maybe both, start to sob. I left them there and went downstairs to make coffee I didn't want. An hour later, they came down together. Noah had showered and changed into some of Ethan's old clothes that mostly fit. He looked almost like a regular teenager until you noticed how carefully he scanned every window. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd learned my son was alive and my marriage was a lie. Ethan poured coffee for all three of us, though Noah's hands shook too much to drink it. "Tell her," Noah said quietly. "Tell her all of it. She deserves to know why I killed a man." The words hit me like a slap. Ethan closed his eyes. His name was Victor Lang. He worked for a ring that trafficked kids across state lines. They targeted county fairs, places with big crowds and distracted parents. Noah was supposed to be transported north within 48 hours. Victor kept him in that barn while he waited for the handoff. Ethan's voice was steady, almost clinical, like he'd told himself this story so many times it no longer hurt. When I found them, Victor was already dead. Noah had fought back. He was covered in blood, half out of his mind. He kept saying they'd kill you if they knew he was still alive, that they had people watching the house. I believed him. Maybe I wanted to believe him because the alternative was turning him over to the police and risking they'd find him again. I looked at Noah. "You were 8 years old." He met my eyes, and for the first time, I saw something hard in them, something that hadn't been there when he was small. "I remember every second," he said. "I remember the way he smelled like onions and whiskey. I remember hitting him until my arms gave out. I remember thinking if I could just kill him, maybe they'd leave you alone." I reached across the table and took his hand. "He let me," Ethan continued. "I got rid of Victor's body, burned it in the woods behind the farm. I sanitized the barn. Then I kept Noah hidden while I tried to figure out who else was involved. The burner phone started getting texts 2 days later, photographs, threats. They knew someone had been there. They wanted their property back." "Property," I repeated, tasting bile. They gave me a deadline. Bring the kid or they'd come collect. I ignored it. "They sent a picture of you asleep in our bed, taken from the backyard. That was when I knew we could never go to the police. These people had reach. Cops, judges, who knows? I decided the only way to keep Noah safe was to let the world think he was gone forever." 9 years, I thought again. 9 years of birthday candles I never lit, of Christmas mornings I spent curled on the floor of his empty room. 9 years of Ethan watching me grieve while he tucked our son into a makeshift bed 20 minutes away. Noah spoke up. "It wasn't all bad," he said, almost apologetic. "Dad brought me books, a laptop with no internet. He taught me how to shoot, how to set traps. We played chess by lantern light. He stayed with me every weekend. But I missed you so much it felt like dying every day." Ethan's head dropped into his hands. I looked at my son, my beautiful broken boy, and made a decision. "We're going to the police," I said. "Today. All of us. We're telling them everything. Victor Lang's body is still out there somewhere. DNA doesn't lie. And those men, whoever they are, they don't get to control our lives anymore." Noah went white. "They'll kill you. They might try," I said. "But there are 3 of us now, and I'm done hiding." Ethan started to protest, but Noah cut him off. "She's right, Dad. I'm tired. I want to go to school. I want to eat pizza in a restaurant without checking the exits every 10 seconds. I want to stop looking over my shoulder." Ethan looked at me, eyes pleading. "Claire, if this goes wrong, then we face it together," I said, "like a family should have from the start." We spent the next hour burning the remaining evidence in the fire pit behind the house. The burner phone, old maps, clothes Noah had outgrown. Then we drove to the county sheriff's office. I walked in first, Noah's hand clutched in mine, Ethan one step behind. The desk sergeant looked up and her pen froze mid-word when she saw Noah's face, older but unmistakable. Half the department had worked his case. Sheriff Ramirez came running when they called her. She took one look at Noah and started crying, which made Noah cry, which made me cry. We were led to an interview room where detectives took our statements for 6 straight hours. They dug up Victor Lang's record, missing since 2017, known associate of a trafficking ring that had gone quiet after several members turned up dead or disappeared. Someone, somewhere, had been cleaning house. By nightfall, the farm was crawling with crime scene techs. They found bone fragments in the burn pit behind the barn, enough for a preliminary DNA match to Victor Lang. Noah gave them his fingerprints willingly. The story broke statewide by morning. Missing boy found alive after 9 years. The miracle of Willow Creek. For 48 hours, we were under protective custody in a safe house while the FBI decided whether the remaining members of the ring still posed a threat. Reporters camped outside. Old friends called sobbing. I let none of them in. Noah wasn't ready, and neither was I. On the 3rd day, they told us the threat was minimal. Most of the higher-ups were dead or in prison on unrelated charges. The few left had gone to ground years ago. Noah was free. We came home to a house full of balloons and banners from neighbors who meant well but didn't understand. Noah stood in the front yard staring at it all like he'd landed on another planet. That night, he asked if we could take the balloons down. We did, working side by side in silence until the lawn was bare again. The first month was harder than any of us expected. Noah slept maybe 3 hours a night, plagued by nightmares that left him screaming. He couldn't stand grocery stores, crowds, or sudden loud noises. School was out of the question for now. We enrolled him in an online program with a therapist who specialized in long-term abduction cases. Ethan and I took turns sitting outside his bedroom door the way I'd done that first night, listening for the sound of his breathing leveling out. Our marriage hung by a thread. We slept in separate rooms. Some nights I couldn't stand to look at Ethan without seeing the years he'd stolen. Other nights I remembered the man who'd burned a body to protect his child, and I didn't know what to feel. We started seeing a counselor together, a woman with kind eyes and no patience for bullshit. She made us say the ugliest truths out loud until they stopped having power. Noah's therapist diagnosed severe PTSD, anxiety, and depression, which felt like being handed a grocery list of ways we'd failed him. But he was tough, tougher than either of us. He started running every morning at dawn, 5 miles, then 10. He cooked dinner 3 nights a week, elaborate recipes he learned from YouTube because it was something he could control. Slowly, he began to fill out the space he took up in the world. One afternoon in early spring, he asked if we could go to the cemetery. We hadn't been since the memorial stone was placed. I drove us there with my heart in my throat. Noah stood in front of the empty grave that bore his name and traced the letters with one finger. I hated this place, he said quietly. Dad used to bring me here once a year so I could see that the world had moved on. He thought it would make me feel safe. It just made me feel buried. Ethan made a sound like he'd been punched. Noah turned and hugged him. "It's okay," he said. "We're here now." That night, Noah asked if he could legally change his name. Not his first name, he wanted to keep Noah, but he didn't want to be Noah Harper anymore. Too many Google results, too many news stories. We hired a lawyer. 2 months later, he became Noah Calder, a quiet tribute to the farm that had both imprisoned and saved him. Summer came. Noah got his learner's permit and practiced driving on back roads with Ethan white-knuckled in the passenger seat. He grew 3 inches and learned how to flirt with the girl who worked the library circulation desk, a shy redhead who never asked why he flinched when someone dropped a stack of books. I watched him become someone new, piece by careful piece. In July, the FBI closed the case. The last known member of the ring had been killed in a prison riot years earlier. There was no one left to come for us. We celebrated with store-bought cake and sparkling cider on the back porch, while fireflies blinked in the dark. Noah looked at me across the table and smiled, a real one that reached his eyes, and I felt something loosen in my chest that had been knotted for nearly a decade. Ethan and I still had work to do. Some nights we sat up late talking about the lies, the choices, the what-ifs. Forgiveness wasn't a single moment. It was 1,000 small ones. Choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier. But we stayed. A year after Noah came home, we took our first family vacation. Nothing grand, just a rented cabin on a lake 3 hours north where the cell service was spotty and the nights were so quiet you could hear your own heart. Noah fished from the dock at dawn, taught himself to skip stones, and laughed out loud when Ethan fell out of a kayak trying to take a selfie. I sat on the porch with coffee and watched them, my husband and my son, silhouettes against the rising sun. And for the first time in 10 years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. On the last night, we built a bonfire and roasted marshmallows until our fingers were sticky. Noah brought out a shoebox he'd been hiding under his bed for weeks. Inside were letters, one for each year he'd been gone, written on whatever paper Ethan could smuggle him. Some were only a few lines. Others went on for pages. He handed them to me without ceremony. "I wrote them for you," he said. "Dad said one day I might get to give them to you. I didn't believe him." I read them by firelight while tears dripped onto the paper and smudged the ink. He'd written about learning to cook over a camp stove, about the hawk that nested in the barn rafters every spring, about how much he missed the sound of my voice reading Harry Potter aloud. The last letter, dated 3 weeks before I found him, ended with, "If I never get to come home, please know I tried to be brave like you taught me." I folded them carefully and put them back in the box. "Thank you," I said, which felt too small for what they were. Ethan added another log to the fire. Sparks flew upward like tiny fleeing stars. Noah leaned his head on my shoulder the way he used to when he was small enough to fit there. "I'm going to college next fall," he announced suddenly. "Early admission came yesterday. Criminal justice. I want to work on cold cases. Find the kids no one's looking for anymore." Ethan and I exchanged a look over his head, pride and terror in equal measure. "That's good," Ethan said, voice rough. "The world needs more people who know what it's like to be lost." We stayed by the fire until it burned down to embers. When we finally went inside, Noah paused in the doorway and looked back at the dark water, the silhouette of trees, the quiet presence of a world that no longer meant him harm. "I used to think freedom would feel louder," he said, "but it's quiet. I like it." Back home, life settled into something that almost looked normal from the outside. Noah started his senior year online, approachingly close to graduation. Ethan took up woodworking, built Noah a desk from scratch for his dorm room. I went back to the library part-time and started a support group for parents of missing children who'd been found. There weren't many of us, but the ones who came needed to hear that survival is possible, that love can outlast even the worst kinds of damage. Some nights I still woke up reaching for a little boy who wasn't there anymore. Some mornings, Ethan still looked at me like he was waiting for me to leave. Some afternoons, Noah still checked the locks 3 times before he could relax. We were scarred, all 3 of us, but scars are proof the wound has closed. On the 2nd anniversary of the day I followed Ethan into the dark and found my son waiting on the other side, we went back to the Calder farm one last time. The county had condemned the buildings, but the land was still empty, waiting for someone to decide what it would become next. We walked through the ruins of the barn together. Sunlight fell through the holes in the roof and painted patterns on the floor. Noah stopped in the exact spot where I'd first seen him sitting at that card table. He pulled something from his pocket, a small wooden box Ethan had carved. Inside was a single match. "I think it's time," he said. We soaked the old wood with accelerant we'd brought for this purpose. Noah struck the match and dropped it. The flames caught fast, hungry after all these years. We stood back and watched the barn burn, orange and gold against the dusk, until there was nothing left but ash and memory. When it was done, Noah turned to us with soot on his cheeks and the clearest eyes I'd ever seen. "I'm ready to go home now," he said. So we did. The three of us, together, into whatever came next. Wow, friends, that was quite a story. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did sharing it with you. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Grace Time with Auntie for more amazing stories. I can't wait to see you all in the next one. Take care and stay happy.